hi everyone. Can you hear me? I'm not usually good with mics. Yeah, you can hear me. So thank you, Amanda, for the introduction, and thank you for having me up here. It's a true honor. And I'm here to talk to you all today about the role that I think everyone in this room can and should play as being a teacher to our kids in schools. And I don't just mean being a role model or being a mentor, and those things are incredibly important, so don't get me wrong, but I mean actually being with kids, teaching something that you either have that skill or it's a passion that you have. And I'm not a teacher. I've never been a teacher, and I may never become a teacher. But as Amanda said, my most recent job was at AOL, and everything I did basically was a fancy title. I managed all of our nonprofit partnerships. And it was in that role that I was introduced to Citizen Schools, the organization I want to talk about today. And actually, quick question, who here has heard of Citizen Schools? Okay, so some of you, so good, it'll be a good learning opportunity. And I'll get a bit into more of the nuts and bolts of how Citizen Schools works later on. But essentially, it's a nonprofit that partners with inner city middle schools to extend the learning day. And what they do is they invite what they call citizen teachers, like you and me, people who may not be teachers, to come in and teach something that we're passionate about. And I think, I've heard the word passion used a lot over the past couple of days. And I'm curious, who, from a show of hands, who feels like they found a passion in their life? Okay. Anyone brave enough to tell us what your passion is?
Helping people.
Helping people. Love it. So what if I asked you to teach that passion of helping people to a school or a class of middle school students? You're in?
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, that was not the answer I was looking for. That's okay. Wasn't my answer at first. Well, it's interesting. I think so many of us have these skills or this knowledge that we inherently have. And it's all of a sudden the moment when someone asks us to teach that or to give that back. At least for me, my mind went blank. And all of a sudden I'm like, I'm not a teacher. I don't have the credentials. I'm not smart enough. What are these kids going to get from me? And it's really interesting how that shifts. And not to mention that when you start thinking about middle school students, my first brain goes to this scene in Mean Girls. And I don't know who's seen this movie, but immediately I'm thinking, like, this is middle school students. They're going to think I'm dumb. They're going to not think I'm cool enough. I'm not wearing the right clothes, right? And it's amazing, right? I work at AOL. I deal with executives. I deal with people way older than me. And all of a sudden, working with middle school students, I'm like terrified, right? I can get up and talk to all of you, right? But like getting up in class of middle schoolers, I was like, But I had committed, right? I'm the head of community relations at AOL. I have to volunteer. So I'm like, I'm in this, guys. And so there's a team of 4 or 5 of us, and Citizen Schools is like, okay, what are you going to teach? What are you passionate about? And I had most recently been in sales, and I'm like, what? I'm going to teach sales to kids? Maybe online advertising on AOL? That's fun. How are we going to sell that in? And, and at the time, AOL we just gone through a big rebranding campaign. And, we had kind of out with the old Running Man. You guys probably remember the Running Man from AOL, right? And we had ingested all these new logos. And I was like, all right, we'll just teach logo design, right? I was on the team of people who did logo design. I wasn't one of them, but I'm sure we could teach that, right? And so the next thing I know, they're like, okay, great, logo design. We'll have these kids create the next AOL logo. Awesome. So now what I want you to do is pitch that, because these kids aren't just going to be in your class. They have to choose to be in your class. So not only do I have to teach them, I have to get them to like me and then also want to opt in to learn how to logo design. So I'm like, all right, we've got to figure out how to buy these kids affection and love, candy. What are we gonna do? So what we do, like any AOLer, we go into our trick closet and we get the Running Man costume, which for many of you, if you don't know, is still in existence. You can actually rent it. It's a big fan favorite at parties, and we talk a lot about last night, Mike was talking about poor Tim. Well, in this case, it was poor Jackie. It was a girl named Jackie who was in our group who we convinced to get into the Running Man costume and get on the subway. It's like a hot, like August day, get on the subway, go to Brooklyn, and we're like, Jackie, just like stand there. Like you don't have to do anything. Maybe do like a Running Man dance, just like stand there. And literally the kids loved us, right? It's like we could have said nothing, and all of a sudden these kids were like, oh my God, I want to be in the class, and AOL is so cool. We're like, yeah, right? Like, these kids love us. So all of a sudden, we've got like a class of like 15 kids, and they're like really excited, and then we like get hit with the reality, like, we have to teach these kids now. Like, what are we gonna do? And, you know, as I'll explain with citizen schools, you know, we're in there with a teacher, so it's not just us, right? So you can feel trusted. And, you know, and week after week, we're like, all right, well, we can figure this out. So, you know, we've got logos. We can talk about the Running Man. He's pretty iconic. What about other logos? What about the Nike logo, Apple? What draws you to these logos? Why are they important? Why do you care about logos? And then we wanted these kids as a final project to create the next AOL logo. So we're like, all right, it's gonna be winter time by the end of our term. So why don't we create a holiday wintry themed logo? So let's think about it. Let's break out into groups. We're gonna think about what that looks like. We're gonna get the artist to start drafting it out. And while they do that, why not? We'll have the kids, a lot of us were in sales and marketing from AOL, so we're like, all right, well then how are we gonna get that logo out into the world? Well, we have to merchandise it. So we're gonna get these logos, we're gonna get them on cups, we're gonna get them on t-shirts, and then we're gonna think about, all right, well if you buy that cup for $2, but then you sell it for $4, you've got a net profit of $2 here. So all of a sudden, we've got like businessmen here, businessmen and women. And then the seller in me, I'm thinking, all right, well, if we're actually going to sell these products, right, to AOLers, that was the final project, go back to AOL and sell this stuff, we need a story. We need a story as to why these kids are going to buy our products and why this logo. And it's amazing. Over 10 or 11 weeks, all of this content came out that I never, you know, all this knowledge that you kind of take for granted. Even if you're not in like a specialized, you know, you're not a doctor or a lawyer, where I felt like I needed like specialty training. So much knowledge that we all have, right? But we may not recognize on a day-to-day basis. And we take for granted, and we think everyone has this knowledge. Everyone can do this, but not everyone can. You know, and especially kids these days who are learning out of textbooks, and I can guarantee you probably never learn this kind of stuff. And, you know, I'm painting it all like, you know, bed of roses, and it was hard. I mean, it was 10 and 11 weeks, and I'm working with inner city middle schoolers, so these are not, like, the behavior management here was a little tough. And, you know, one of these kids, his name was Jair, and he was responsible for selling his group, right, the bag that they had created. And, you know, I'm working with Jair, because we're practicing, we're gonna go to AOL the next week, and I'm like, Jair, all right, give me your pitch. How are you gonna sell them? He's like, I'm not going. I'm like, why, Jair? And he's like, this is stupid. And I'm like, Jair, why is this stupid? And he's like, because the logo that's on the bag that we're selling is not my idea. And I'm like, Jair, all right, so we need to talk about teamwork and cooperation. So here come a whole other like set of skills, right, that you need to learn in the workplace. But then I'm like, Jair, you might be talking to my CEO next week, so I'm gonna need you to start kind of like going by these guidelines, because I kind of need you to make me look good. And all of a sudden, he starts, like middle schoolers, I've come to learn, have a very uncanny ability to sense fear. And all of a sudden, he's like, oh, your CEO? Well, I'm gonna tell him that I like Google better than AOL. And my CEO came from Google, and I was like, you can't do that. And I shouldn't have said that, because he was like, well, then I'm gonna do it. And I'm like, and I go home, and I'm freaking out, and I'm like, I failed as a teacher, why am I here? This is ridiculous. These kids are gonna go in next week, blah, blah, blah. So I'm freaking out. And next week, they come in, and I'm floored. And what happens, I think, with kids who've never really been to an office building before and aren't really used to this atmosphere, all of a sudden went, and they were unbelievable. They ended up selling about $2,000 worth of merchandise in that one day to AOLers. It's amazing. All of which got reinvested back into their school. And I wanted to show this picture. So that's Jair. And that's Jair right after he had sold a bag to my CEO. And So of course, everyone's like doing their sales pitch, and like I see in the corner of my eye, and I'm like really happy that Tim Armstrong, my CEO, had come to this, and so I see him talking to Jair, and I'm like, oh great, of all people. So I'm like kind of like creeping around, like what's going on? Let's listen to and all of a sudden, Tim turns to me, and he's like, we need to hire this kid. Who taught him how to sell like that? And I was like, oh my gosh. And then I looked, and I was like, I kind of did that, And it wasn't just me, right? It was just me giving him the opportunity. And how many middle schoolers get the opportunity to go to one of the largest media companies in the world and then also sell and interact with the CEO of one of the biggest media companies in the world, right? An experience that you're never going to find in a textbook, probably not in a classroom. And I wanted to show this other picture. So this is Thomas, and he was the artist who actually created that specific logo. And I just show this because Thomas was absolutely incredible. He was a totally shy kid. And all of a sudden, when we were looking for the artist in the room, his hand shot up. And he created that. And I was blown away. It's beautiful. So he put them on these bags, and he's here proudly presenting his work, not only to AOLers, but in these WOWs, we invite the community and the kids' parents in. So that's a picture of that. And it's like they became my kids, right? I was so proud of them. And that was my catalyst moment, I think, when I realized that these kids, like I actually had something to offer them. I was not like a skilled lawyer or a doctor. I was a salesperson turned cause marketer, corporate philanthropist. But it's amazing once we kind of get past this like mental barrier of like the fact that we actually do have something to give, even if we don't originally think that we do. And it became my kind of mission at AOL over the next 3 years to get as many people at AOL figuring out what they would teach. And over 3 years, I got I think it was over 100 AOLers in New York and Boston and Chicago. And we reached over 1,200 kids through citizen schools. And the relationship is still going. And it's incredible. I mean, looking at just AOL and these apprenticeships, and the cool thing about citizen schools is you can teach whatever you're passionate about, right? So yoga, music. AOLers, we obviously it's a big media company. So one of the apprenticeships, we had just launched HuffPost Live. So we had the kids on to HuffPost Live to learn about how to make a news show. We had the AOL music team. They knew all sorts of celebrities. So we had Wyclef Jean go into their class. And they interviewed Wyclef Jean for a day in the life documentary, which we then put on AOL for our public and consumers to read and watch. Healthy cooking, we taught all of the kids about local, healthily sourced food. And then lastly, we even had Tim and Ariana Huffington go in and teach a class about journalism, right? And this is skills that we do every day, right? These are people, these are tools, sets that we have, and not every company is like this. Obviously, we all have different companies, we all have different resources, but we all can give them back in a way that's different than we maybe had seen them before. And by the way, working and all of the feedback we got from AOLers is that people felt so much happier about the job that they did and so much more reinforced because they actually realized that something that you do does matter. Even though a lot of us go to work every day and we're like, what are we really doing? Does it really matter? And the answer is yes, it does. It just depends on how you look at it. And so I've gone on, I've spent a lot of time at AOL working with citizen schools. I've gone on to join their board and do more things like this where I'm trying to engage more people outside of AOL to learn about citizen schools and really think about the role that they can play in education. And it's really led me to think more about the why is this so important, other than this makes me feel good and other than kids really seem to like it, but why is this so important that we get engaged now? And I think that there's no real one easy answer, right? If there was, I'm sure someone really smart would have figured it out by now. But I would say that there's probably 3 big reasons as to why. And the folks from Green Dot Schools last night were talking about it. The current graduation rate hovers around 75% average in the US. When you go into lower income communities, that drops to about 50%. Why is that? Well, a couple of reasons. One, we still live in this agrarian schedule where kids are getting out at 3 or 3:30. Well, that worked when kids are going out to work in the fields at 3 or 3:30, but now kids, you're either lucky enough to go piano lessons or sports. If not, you are maybe going home and disengaging through video games, or even worse, you're engaging in activities and crowds that you shouldn't be engaging with. So I really think we need to think about how long we're keeping our kids in school. Secondarily, it's this industrial era design of our curriculum. So way back when, people were getting trained for their jobs in an industrial, so a proficient use of English, science, and math was needed. We live in a very different world today. We live in a very connected world. We live in a world where we want our kids to become more whole, more human. And that's why I get so excited to hear about the school that's launching here in downtown Vegas that's looking at the neuroscience, that's looking at the entrepreneurship, to think beyond just what we're learning in textbooks. Because the problem is, what kids are learning and why so many of them, I think, drop out is they're bored. And what they're learning isn't relevant, right? We're learning to teach kids how to answer A, B, C, or D, right? And teachers, it's not just students, teachers are beholden to that standard for themselves, so they have to give that away, right? And so we're teaching kids how to learn linearly instead of divergently, right? How do we teach kids how to think like this? So you see this one thing, how can we get two solutions for that one thing? How can we look at something differently? And then lastly, is it a limited teacher pipeline? I'm sure we all know teachers in this room. I know a few amazing teachers, and unfortunately, a lot of teachers these days that are really good get burned out, and they decide that I'm going to go and I'm going to get a better job that pays more money and gives me more respect, right? And that's a problem because it's a limited supply. And if you look at other countries like Japan, I've heard that teachers, it's considered an honor to be a teacher there. I would venture to guess it doesn't feel like an honor to be a teacher here in America. So quickly, I'll go through just the model of how Citizen Schools approaches, the solution to these answers. And this is a look into the regular schedule, getting in at 7, leaving at 3. They believe in an extended learning model. So rather than leaving at 3, what they do is they bring in a second shift of educators. So these are the same educators that they come in. They're AmeriCorps fellows, and that helps to relieve this idea. They're relieving that first shift of educators, right, to help with that pipeline problem. They're then spending the first 90 minutes of that extra 3 hours with academic support, extra homework help, extra delving in. And then the next 90 minutes is when people like you and me come in and we teach them what they will never find in a textbook, right? We find and we teach them what's relevant. And I think that the two biggest things that I've learned from these apprenticeships, and by the way, it's working. I mean, Citizen Schools did a longitudinal study over 20 years, and kids who go through Citizen Schools and go through this type of learning graduate at a rate of 20% higher from high school than those that don't. And one, I think it's because we're teaching them relevancy, as I keep talking about. The Pythagorean theorem, if you read it in textbook, may not make sense, and why do I ever need to know that? But if you're working with a Googler, Citizen Schools works a lot with Google to learn how to make a robot, all of a sudden, that theorem, that I can't even pronounce it, Pythagorean and theorem, whatever, that makes sense. I didn't major in science. And secondly, you're showing them what's possible. Half of the kids, maybe more than that, had never even been to Manhattan before when we brought them into AOL. They've never seen an office building. They don't understand why or where they could be going. And they don't understand, if I stay in school now, this is what could happen. And so what I'll leave with everyone today with is just the question of what will you teach? Because I can guarantee you, it's become kind of ingrained in me, and I kind of go through life of, I could teach that. That would be a great apprenticeship. And it kind of changes everything. It changes your perspective. So I ask you just to think about that in your own life, because I really think it's too much to leave it to the current schedule or the current school system and our current teachers alone to figure out our education crisis. So I want to thank you. If you have any questions about Citizen Schools, you can visit the website, talk to me. And I would also say John Werner from Citizen Schools, I think, is going to be at Catalyst Week in August next month, giving a talk from his perspective working in Citizen Schools. So hopefully you'll come back for that. And I hope I inspired one or two of you in here. Thank you.